Hey guys, how's it going? Yuri here as usual, and there might be two things that you're wondering. The first thing is, why on earth am I wearing a toque? And the second thing is, why on earth do I have a huge box and a huge bag of candy sitting in front of me? Well, the first question, why do I have a toque on? Because I'm freezing. As you may know, I have a kind of lower level office, and it gets cold down here because heat rises, and right now it's pretty cold in southern Ontario, so I'm putting my hat on. So, this is the kind of the way I roll because I get cold pretty quickly. So that's why I'm wearing a toque, at least momentarily. The second thing is obviously the candies here, and the reason that they're sitting here is because they are going to fuel me for the rest of this day with tons of energy, right? Not. Okay, so the real reason that they're here is actually that, as I mentioned yesterday, we're going to be looking at Halloween candy, chocolate bars, all that kind of good stuff, right? So as I mentioned, I think in the previous video, the video before that, when I was younger, and this is like 10 years ago, like literally into my early 20s, I would still go trick-or-treating and come home with this times 10 in terms of candies and chocolates, specifically chocolates, because I do really enjoy chocolate even to this day, and I might even have a coffee crisp. You know, that's how bad it is. But we'll, what I want to do in this video is I want to show you how little candies like this, and again, you can see that this box isn't open, right? So I'm going to just open this up right now. This will be the inaugural opening of the Hollywood candies. And I'm just going to show you something. Just give me a second here. Alright, so I'm going to grab an example of a coffee crisp, okay? So I'm looking at the nutrition label here for a second. I'm going to give you a close-up. If you can see this, I'm going to just bring it in front of the camera. So what we're going to look at, if we can get this there, is coffee crisps. Okay, so just on the one side of the screen here, right, where are we? Somewhere right there? Somewhere right there? Right there. Okay, so we're going to look at coffee crisp, and the one thing I want you to look at is the sugars. 5 grams of sugar per bar, okay, per one bar. Now the other thing I want you to look at are the ingredients. First thing you'll notice, if you can even see this, is sugar, okay? That's the first thing you'll notice. Now it doesn't really matter which one we're talking about. I mean, Coffee Crisp, Smarties, Kit Kat, and Aero. First ingredient is sugar. Smarties milk chocolate, which is comprised of sugar. Kit Kat milk chocolate, which is comprised first and foremost of sugar. So the first ingredient in all of these chocolates is sugar, okay? Now, what you need to understand about sugar is that sugar, in this case, represents sucrose, okay? So when you think of sugar, sucrose. Sugar is table sugar, that's what they're referring to, okay? Now, as I mentioned before, sugar, or sucrose, is 1 molecule of glucose, 1 molecule of fructose, okay? Now I'm going to talk about why that's important in this video. So let's see, just before we get into that, let me see the other ingredients here, because I'm going to talk specifically about the quantitative side today, not so much the qualitative side, but let's quickly just look at the ingredient list of coffee crisps. Sugar, wheat flour, modified palm, which is a type of fat, sunflower and safflower oil, modified milk ingredients, cocoa mass, cocoa butter, soy lecithin, coffee, sodium bicarbonate, lactose, cocoa, yeast, polyglycerol, I don't even know what that is, and natural flavors. Okay, so what's the big issue with this? Okay, so first of all, let's examine that we're talking about literally 2 bites of a coffee crisp. This is how big a bar is. Okay, the big coffee crisp bar we know is probably like 5 times this size. So I'm just going to take the assumption of one of these little guys, and let's assume that on Halloween you might have 10 of them. Okay, so 10 of these are a combination of 10 other chocolates. Now, one of these bars has 5 grams of sugar. Now, we mentioned that it has half glucose, half fructose. Now, here's why this matters. I mentioned in the other video that fructose is metabolized very differently than glucose is. So what happens in this case is glucose, 80% of glucose, is absorbed right through the small intestine and goes directly into your bloodstream, because in the bloodstream, glucose is the currency. Okay, it goes into your cells, and the cells use glucose as a substrate to produce ATP, which is the ultimate source of energy that our cells need. So that's fine. 80% of it is removed off the table. It goes into the blood and into the cells. Now that's not to say that this is still not going to spike your blood sugar, because this is going to be quickly absorbed. So all that blood glucose going into your blood sugar is still going to spike your blood sugar, which is going to lead to what? Right? And spike in insulin, which is then going to store a lot of that sugar into your cells, specifically your fat cells, assuming that your muscle glycogen is taken up. Okay? So that's the first part of this equation. Now, 20% of glucose is then going to be filtered. It kind of 80% goes right into the blood, 20% goes directly to the liver for processing. So the liver is going to store some of it as glycogen. It's also going to produce ATP for its own purposes. So 20% of that. Now, if we take 5 grams, 2.5 grams would be glucose, 2.5 grams would be sucrose. Okay, so 0.5 grams of that glucose is going to go right to the liver. That's 20%, and the other 80%, the 2 grams, is going to go right into the bloodstream. And to be honest, guys, our bloodstream really only carries about 5 grams of sugar at any point. Okay, so that's right there. That's almost half of your blood sugar for any given moment in time. Okay, so you have a couple of these, your blood sugar is going to go through the roof. Okay, so now we've got 0.5 grams of glucose to the liver, and the other 2.5 grams of this sugar, which is fructose, goes exclusively to the liver. Okay, it's about 90%. Goes 90 to 100% of the fructose goes right to the liver, because it cannot be used anywhere in the body if it's not processed and metabolized and broken down first through the liver. So why this is a problem is that in general, your liver can handle glucose metabolism no problem. It's a very efficient method of producing energy and storing glucose as glycogen. That's fine. And in general, like if you compared this to having, let's say, the same amount of maple syrup is actually higher in glucose, much higher. It's about a 4-to-1 glucose to fructose ratio, and that's why I recommend maple syrup as a post-workout sugar, because it's very quick glucose into the cells. But if you compare maple syrup to Coffee Crisp, it has less fructose. So from a blood sugar perspective, you don't just want to be having maple syrup on a routine basis, just really after your workouts mainly, because that's when the cells want to absorb it all. But in the sense that it has less fructose, it's actually going to provide less of a burden on your liver. Now, when more fructose ends up in your liver has to work a lot harder to break all of it down into its end products. And unfortunately, as I mentioned before, 30%, because there's so much of a, if you want to call them byproducts, from like the liver is over inundated with fructose. Okay, so the liver, it can't process that much, so it ends up building up these substrates like pyruvates, which can enter into the Krebs cycle as acetyl-CoA. I'm not going to get too technical here, but I'm going to kind of briefly just mention a couple things. But some of that can't enter into that ATP production Krebs cycle. So some of it leaves the mitochondria as citrates, and then there are a couple enzymes in the liver which turn that into acyl-CoA, which is kind of a prerequisite for a fat molecule, and then that acyl-CoA combines with another protein. It leaves the liver as a triglyceride. Okay, so that's a very rundown, kind of diluted version of how it works, but essentially that's what happens when you have a buildup of all this fructose coming in and your liver can't handle it. A lot of it leaves the liver as triglycerides. It also ends up leaving fatty liver deposits, so kind of lipid deposits or droplets inside the liver. And if you've ever heard of fatty liver disease, the reason for that is not fat, okay? And it's not, it's not fat. It's really coming from sugar and alcohol, because fructose and alcohol are metabolized almost identically and have the exact same byproducts, more or less. Okay, so that's what's happening in the liver with the sugar intake. Now, so imagine if you have one of these. Okay, that's whatever. If you have 10 of these, let's say you have 10 of these, or your son or your daughter does, or your family or friends do, every single day for 1 to 2 weeks after Halloween. Right? Just imagine the increased amount of fat storage that's going to create. Okay, 30% of fructose. So in this case, we have 3 grams of fructose from the 5 grams. Or 2.5 grams of fructose from these 5 grams that are ending up in the liver. If we multiply that by 10, that's 25. If we take 30% of that fructose, I'm just going to bust out the calculator, right? That's 7.5 grams of fructose now being metabolized as fat. Now, if we convert that just by carbohydrate molecules, that's 30 calories of of fructose, right? But if it's metabolized as fat, then it might be converted at a higher ratio, which means that we now multiply that by 9 calories per gram. So 25 times 9 equals 225 calories because now it's being stored as fat. So you can see that not all calories are created equal. A calorie does not equal a calorie, and that's part of the reason why weight loss is not as simple as calories in, calories out. Okay, so I know this is a little bit technical, but it's really important to understand this stuff because when you understand how the body processes the sugar or does not process the sugar and the resulting consequences, you have more power to make better decisions and are more motivated, hopefully, to make better decisions. So that's why I wanted to bring this stuff up to you because Halloween is just a few days away. And you know what? Like honestly, if you have a candy bar here and there, it's not the end of the world. Enjoy Halloween with your kids, whatever. But do it in moderation. You don't need to come back with truckloads of candy like I did when I was a kid. I mean, I used to lay on my bed with terrible stomach aches. I had no idea why, right? Maybe it was the sugar. So hopefully this has enlightened you. And if you like this kind of stuff, remember, stay tuned for February because it's going to blow your mind. It's going to be a very, very, very special time. So yeah, until then, I'm going to be taking 3 months off, and I'll see you then. Actually, no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so there we go. That's the deal with sugar. That's the deal with candy bars, and that's the deal with Halloween. That's why so many people gain weight and get sick after Halloween because remember, sugar is very acidifying in the blood, and we haven't even talked about that whole thing. But if you've read Eating for Energy, you know the consequences. So I'm going to stop now. It's time to hit the gym, and I'll see you in the next video.